Welcome to Family Revenge Betrayal. Stay tuned, have a fun time, and let's talk in the comments. Let's go.
At 2:03 a.m., agents flooded my living room, rifles up, my kids crying behind their doors, and I'm face down on the floor wondering if I'll see sunrise. The CIA, they said. And then I realized the caller wasn't a stranger. It was my own parents, and they chose my kids. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type interested in the comments. And I will give you a heart. My front door didn't knock. It detonated, and I mean that literally, a concussive boom that rattled picture frames, shook the entryway tile, and made my stomach drop so hard I thought I was about to throw up. And then the living room got blasted with white light, so bright it felt like somebody opened the sun inside my house. And before my brain could even form the word why, a voice screamed, "Get down," like it hated me personally. And my body obeyed, because when someone yells like that in your home, you don't debate. You survive, palms flat on the rug, cheek pressed into fibers that smelled like detergent and old popcorn, heartbeat punching my ribs like it wanted out, boots pounding, radios chirping, metal clinking, and then another voice, calmer, colder, the kind of calm that makes you more scared because it means they've done this 1,000 times, said, "Hands where I can see them." And I lifted my hands like I was surrendering to the air itself, and the next thing I saw was black. Helmets, tactical vests, rifles up, not a couple cops doing a welfare check, not a neighbor complaint. This was full tactical energy, and in the middle of my panic, my brain did something sick. It tried to make it make sense by pretending this was a nightmare, because who gets raided at 2 a.m. in a house with kids asleep down the hall? And then the worst part happened. The hallway, my hallway, where my kids' doors were, filled with moving shadows and a low voice telling my child, "Police, buddy, stay in bed." And I couldn't see them, but I could hear the tiny broken sound of a kid trying to be brave and failing, and I wanted to scream, "Please don't scare them." But I didn't, because screaming is how you get mistaken for a threat, and then I felt it. The most humiliating part, the total helplessness of being a parent and not being able to stand up between danger and your children. Because I was pinned to the floor in my own house like a criminal in front of my own family. A beam of light hit my face and a man barked, "Don't move." And my voice came out thin and cracked. "I'm not moving. My kids are asleep, please." And then everything shifted because a different voice cut through the chaos. "Hold." And it wasn't loud, but everyone listened, like the room snapped into a new gear, and I turned my head just enough to see him, the one they listened to, older, measured, eyes like he'd seen too much. And something about him felt federal, not local, not county. The way his posture carried authority without needing volume, and he stepped into the spill of light and stared at me for half a second too long, like he recognized my face, and my stomach went ice because he looked like someone I'd seen before in a normal setting, a school safety talk, a community meeting, one of those "we're here to keep you safe" guys. Except now he was here in tactical gear, at 2 a.m. in my living room. He crouched down, not friendly but not cruel, and said, "Ma'am, name," and I swallowed hard, mouth dry like cotton. "Danielle." I whispered, "Danielle Harper." And his eyes flicked toward the hallway and he asked, "Kids?" And I nodded fast. "2, they're asleep. Please don't go in there yelling." And he spoke into his radio, clipped and calm. "2 kids in residence, slow it down the hall." And that one sentence made me want to cry, because he cared enough to say it out loud. And then he asked, "Any weapons in the house?" And I shook my head so hard my hair stuck to my face. No, I have kitchen knives and a baseball bat in the closet from years ago. That's it." And he didn't react. He just stayed in process mode. "Anyone else here?" "No," I said, "just me." And voices around us called out, "Clear kitchen, clear left," moving to hallway, and the sound of my child's door opening made my chest tighten so hard it hurt, and I held my breath like breathing might set somebody off. The lead agent kept his eyes on mine and said, "Listen carefully. We got a report you were armed and dangerous." And I blinked like my brain short-circuited. "What?" And he continued, "Caller said there were weapons and an immediate threat that officers would be met with violence." And my stomach flipped. "That's a lie," I said, voice shaking. "I would never." And he nodded just slightly like he believed me, but still had to clear the house. And then he asked the question that always reveals, "Who's really behind the curtain? Any reason someone would call this in on you?" And I felt my throat dry out because the answer wasn't complicated, it was just ugly, and it wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some random beef. It was the people who know my routines, who know my house, who know my kids' names, and that's when you realize the most dangerous enemies are the ones who know where the light switches are. I swallowed and said it quietly, because even saying it felt like I was betraying some unwritten family rule. My parents, and you could hear the room almost pause at that, not because it's impossible, but because it's the kind of thing people don't want to believe, and the agent's expression didn't go shocked. It went confirmed, like he just watched the last puzzle piece click into place. He leaned closer and said so low only I could hear, "Danielle, I thought it was you." And my skin went cold. "What?" I whispered, and he exhaled through his nose like he was angry at the universe more than me. "I know your father," he said, "and I know this move," and that phrase, "I know this move," made my blood run cold because it meant my parents weren't just being dramatic. They were experienced, and if you're hearing this right now, and your stomach is tightening because you've got a family member who plays dirty like this, I want you to tell me something in the comments when you're done listening. Do you think parents can do something so evil that they lose the right to call themselves parents? Yes or no? Because I already know my answer, and it's not polite. The agent straightened and said louder for the team, "Bring me the call sheet." And a minute later a printed page landed in his hand, and he scanned it fast, jaw tightening on one line. And he looked back down at me and said, "Okay, this is worse than I thought." And then he flipped the page toward his chest like he didn't want it seen by everyone and asked, "Do you have any idea why the caller specifically claimed you had a device in the house?" A device. I stared at him, confused, because what kind of device are we talking about? A tracker, a weapon, some made-up movie thing. And then from the hallway an officer called out, "Kids are secure, no weapons found, house is coming back clean." And you'd think that would make everyone relax. But the agent didn't look relieved. He looked certain, like the lie was the point, not the discovery. He glanced at the call sheet again and muttered under his breath, "They escalated it because they wanted forced entry." And when he said forced entry, I looked at my splintered door frame and the broken lock, and suddenly I understood why there was no polite knock, why there was no "Ma'am, can you come outside?" Because whoever called wanted chaos. They wanted a scene, they wanted my kids traumatized, they wanted my neighbors watching, they wanted me humiliated. And the sick part is it worked, because by 2:17 a.m. my living room didn't feel like my home anymore. The rug was shoved sideways, zip-tie cuffs sat on the coffee table like they'd been considered, and down the hall my kids were awake now, sniffling, whispering, trying to be brave because strangers with guns had stepped into their night. The agent crouched again and guided me upright slow, sit up, hands visible, and he moved me to the couch like I was glass, and then he placed the call sheet on the coffee table between us and said, "This is why we came in hot." And I stared at the words like they were poison, time, address, response code, and then those short ugly notes typed by dispatch, subject armed, threats to officers. And then the line that made my stomach drop into my feet, possible explosive device. And I looked up at him and whispered, "Explosive?" And he didn't dramatize it, he just said it flat. "That's why you got the lights in the door." And then he tapped another line and said, "Caller identified themselves as your parent." And I felt my face go numb, because that meant they didn't even hide it. They stood behind their lie with their own names like they were proud of it, like they wanted credit for ruining my night. And then he added the detail that made it personal in a way I can't explain. Without you feeling it in your bones, they gave your full name, your kids' first names, and described the layout. And I felt rage bubble up so fast it scared me, because only family can map your life like that. Only family can turn your routines into ammunition. I swallowed hard and asked, "So what happens now?" And he didn't promise miracles, he promised process. "We take your statement, we document the kids being present, we photograph the door, we pull the recording, we pull the log, and then we find out who did this." And then his radio chirped and a dispatcher's voice cut through, "Lead, reporting party is calling back." And my blood turned to ice, because what kind of person calls back after sending agents into a home with children? What kind of person checks their work like they're tracking a delivery order? And the agent's face changed immediately, not surprised, not confused, just grim, and he said, "Put them through to my line speaker." And he looked at me and said, "Listen, don't speak unless I tell you." And I nodded because my mouth was full of things that could get me in trouble. He set his phone down, hit speaker, and my father's voice filled my wrecked living room, warm, polite, almost cheerful, like he was calling to check on a dinner reservation. "Hi," he said. "Did you find it yet?" And in that moment, with my door broken and my kids crying and my hands still shaking, I realized this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusion. It was intent. And the scariest part wasn't that he asked, "Did you find it?" It was the fact he sounded satisfied, like he expected the answer to. BS, like he expected my life to be in pieces, and the agent stared at the phone, then at me, and then said in a calm voice that made my stomach drop for a completely different reason, "Sir, identify yourself." And my father said it like he owned the night. "This is Thomas Harper, her father," and the agent's eyes narrowed as he asked, "Mr. Harper, tell me exactly what you reported." And my father took a breath, and I swear I could hear the smile in his voice as he began to explain a story about his own daughter that sounded rehearsed, polished, and deadly, and right as I thought I couldn't feel any smaller in my own home, my mother's voice slid into the call in the background, whispering, "Make sure they go all the way in." And that whisper did something to me that the door breach didn't even do, because it meant this wasn't one parent panicking, it was both of them coordinating. And I sat there staring at the phone like it was a loaded weapon because whatever they were about to say next was either going to bury me or expose them. My father's voice coming through that speaker in my wrecked living room didn't sound worried. It sounded managed, like he'd put on his respectable citizen tone, the one he uses at church and parent-teacher nights and neighborhood barbecues, the voice that says I'm a good man who would never do anything cruel, even while he's actively doing something cruel, and the agent didn't match his energy at all. He stayed flat, professional, and that contrast was terrifying because it meant my father's charm wasn't going to work the way it usually does on people who don't know him. "Mr. Harper," the agent said, "tell me exactly what you reported." My father didn't hesitate, and that's how you know this wasn't panic. Panic has pauses. Panic has stumbles. This man delivered a story like he'd rehearsed it in the mirror. "My daughter has been acting unstable," he said smoothly, "and I'm afraid she has access to dangerous items." The word unstable made my jaw tighten so hard my teeth hurt, because that's the family's favorite weapon. Label you unstable and suddenly anything they do to you becomes for your own good. The agent's eyes flicked up to me once. Not sympathy, more like a warning. Don't react. Let him talk, because the more he talks, the more rope he hands you. "What dangerous items?" the agent asked, and my father kept going like he'd been waiting for that question. "A device," he said, and my stomach turned over, because hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way it wasn't when it was just typed on a call sheet. The agent's voice stayed boring, deadly boring. "What kind of device, sir?" And my father did something that made my blood go cold. He tried to sound reluctant, like he hated to accuse me. "Something that could harm people," he said. "Something explosive." The word explosive hung in the air like smoke, and I heard one of my kids sniffle down the hall, and my hands curled into fists in my lap because my father had just spoken the kind of word that gets people killed if anyone misreads a movement. The agent didn't flinch, he just asked, "Did you see it?" My father paused for half a second, just half, and then he did the thing liars do when they know they can't claim a direct sighting. He pivoted to confidence. "I have reason to believe," he said, and then my mother's whisper came through again, not directly into the call but loud enough that the agent could hear the background murmur. "Tell them about the threats," she said, like she was coaching him, like they were doing a duet performance called "Destroy Our Daughter." The agent's eyes sharpened slightly, and he leaned closer to the speaker. "Ma'am," he said, "I can't hear you. Identify yourself." My mother's breath caught on the line, and she went silent, and my father jumped in fast to cover it. "That's my wife," he said. "We're both extremely concerned." Concern? That word almost made me laugh, because when you're truly concerned about your child, you call them, you show up, you ask if they're okay. You don't send a tactical team into their house at 2 a.m. like you're ordering punishment from a menu. The agent asked, "Mr. Harper, you told dispatch officers would be met with violence." My father went on like he had no idea how serious that was. "She's been saying alarming things." The agent's voice tightened just a notch. "What alarming things?" My father's tone turned righteous. "She's been talking about making people pay," he said. "She has children in the home. She's not thinking clearly." And right there, he tried to use my kids as the excuse, like he was protecting them, while the reality was my kids were crying because of him. I felt heat rise in my chest, and I could hear Daniel's voice in my head from another life I hadn't built yet. Don't give them fuel. Let them incriminate themselves. The agent asked the cleanest question in the world, the question that separates fear from malice. Why did you choose 2 a.m.? And my father actually scoffed like he was offended. Because it's an emergency, he said, and then my mother, thinking she was whispering privately, hissed, because she'd ignore us if we called. That one sentence was so revealing I almost choked because it admitted the truth. They weren't calling because they were scared. They were calling because they wanted force. They wanted control. They wanted to override my consent. The agent's eyes narrowed and he asked slowly, "So you're telling me you contacted law enforcement because your adult daughter would not respond to you?" My father snapped back, "Don't twist it." And that's when his mask slipped for a second, because people like my father can handle polite conversation. They cannot handle being questioned like a suspect. The agent didn't get emotional. He didn't argue. He just moved him deeper into his own lies. "Mr. Harper," he said, "which room is the device in?" And my father answered too quickly, "The garage." The agents had tilted, and I felt a strange flicker of relief. Because my house doesn't have a garage. It has a small carport and a storage closet, and you could see the agent's jaw tighten like he'd just found the crack. "Sir," he said, "there is no garage at this address." Silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. My father recovered fast, but not clean. "The back area," he said, irritation creeping in. "You know what I mean? Don't play semantics." Don't play semantics. That's what liars say when details expose them. The agent didn't let it go. "How do you know the layout of her home?" he asked. My father sighed like he was being inconvenienced. "Because we've been there," he said, and then my mother chimed in louder now. "We've helped her. We've done everything for her." And I almost lost it at that because yes, they've helped me the way a person helps a bird by clipping its wings and calling it safety. The agent's voice stayed flat. "When was the last time you were inside?" My father hesitated, and then I heard the ugliest thing, not a confession, but a calculation in his pause, like he was deciding which answer gave him the most power. "Recently," he said, and the agent pressed, "Define recently." My father's irritation spiked. "Why does that matter?" The agent said, "Because you just gave an inaccurate description of the residence, and you've escalated this to a level that can get people killed." People killed. Hearing that phrase in my living room made my stomach twist. My father's tone shifted into defensive outrage. "Are you accusing me of lying?" And the agent answered calmly, "I'm assessing credibility." Credibility. That word hit my father like a slap, because my father's whole identity is built on being the credible one, the respectable one, the one people listen to. My father tried a different tactic. He went softer, almost pleading. "Officer, you don't understand. She's manipulative. She's always been difficult." Difficult. That was the oldest story in our family, the story they tell when you start having boundaries. My mother added, "She's been keeping the kids from us." And I clenched my fists harder because there it was, the real motive finally peeking through the lie, access to my children. The agent didn't react to their emotion. He reacted to the facts. "Sir," he said, "do you have proof? Texts, photos, anything showing a device, a weapon, or direct threats tonight?" My father hesitated again. "We don't have pictures," he said, "but we know her." That sentence sounded exactly like a person trying to justify pushing someone down the stairs. "I don't have proof, but I know her." The agent repeated it like he wanted the recording to capture how insane it was. "So, you do not have direct proof, but you requested a tactical response." My father snapped. "I requested help." And the agent said, "Help does not require a forced entry to a home with sleeping children." My mother's voice sharpened. "We were trying to protect the kids." And I felt my throat tighten because the lie was so bold it was almost art. They were trying to protect the kids by traumatizing the kids. My father then did what people like him always do when cornered. He tried to smear me with a new allegation, because if you can't prove the original claim, you muddy the water. "She's been taking money," he blurted. "She's been hiding cash. She's been lying." The agent cut him off instantly. "Stop. You are adding new allegations on a recorded line." And my father hissed, "Because it's true." The agent's voice got colder. Then you can provide evidence through proper channels. Right now, you have triggered a high-risk response with claims you cannot verify. My father's voice rose. So you're just going to let her get away with it? That line was the first honest line because it revealed his goal wasn't safety, it was punishment. Let her get away with it. As if my existence was a crime. The agent leaned closer to the phone and asked, Mr. Harper, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you knowingly make a false report tonight? My father laughed once, short, mean, like he couldn't believe someone dared to ask him that. How dare you, he said. And the agent repeated, yes or no. My father's tone turned sharp and controlling. You're going to regret speaking to me like this. That line, that threat, that's the real man, the one behind the respectable mask, and the agent's eyes flicked to me again like he was thinking, okay, now I see it, now I see who she's dealing with. The agent said calmly, Mr. Harper, this call is recorded. Your earlier call is recorded. Threatening an officer is not going to help you. My mother jumped in, panicked now. We didn't threaten you, and the agent said, Ma'am, you are on the line too. Identify yourself. My mother went quiet again, and my father tried to pull the conversation back into his control. Where's my daughter? He demanded. Put her on. The agent's voice didn't change. No, just no. And I swear, that one word felt like someone finally told my father he's not the center of the universe. My father's voice hardened. She's my daughter. The agent replied, she is an adult. And your report has been found not credible so far. My father sputtered, not credible, like it was the most offensive phrase in the English language, and the agent said, Sir, your description of the residence is inaccurate and you have no direct evidence of a device. There was a pause, and then my father said something that made the room go colder than any tactical light ever could. Then go find something. It was subtle, almost a suggestion, the kind of suggestion people like him think they can make because they believe authority is a tool they can rent. The agent didn't yell. He just went very still. Repeat that, he said. My father realized too late he'd stepped on a landmine. I'm saying do your job, he snapped. The agent's voice turned flat, final. Mr. Harper, I am ending this call. Do not contact this line again. My father shouted, You can't. But the agent ended it anyway, and the speaker went silent, and for a second the only sound in my ruined living room was my kid crying softly down the hall, and an officer murmuring reassurances in a gentle voice that felt like it didn't belong in the same night. The agent looked at me and said, I need your statement. And I need you to tell me the truth about your parents. I swallowed hard and asked, What happens to them? He didn't promise fireworks, he promised accountability. We pull the audio, we pull the logs, we document damages, we document children present, we document the false layout, and then we forward it. He tapped the call sheet again and said, This doesn't disappear because they're family. If anything, it gets worse because they used family access to make it believable. I felt my hands start shaking again, and I hated that my kids were going to remember this night forever. The night strangers with guns entered their hallway because Grandma and Grandpa wanted to teach Mom a lesson. The agent stood up, scanned the room, and then said something that made my stomach drop and my brain sharpen at the same time. Your parents weren't the only ones talking tonight. I blinked. What do you mean? He pointed at a line on the call sheet, the one I hadn't noticed because my eyes had been glued to the words explosive and armed. There was a second call, he said. A follow-up. From a different number. Different number. My throat tightened. Who? He didn't answer immediately. He looked at me like he was deciding how much truth I could handle at 2:30 in the morning with 2 scared kids and a splintered door. Then he said, Someone who knows your routine. Someone who knew the kids were home. Someone who wanted us to stay longer. My blood went cold because now I wasn't just dealing with my parents' betrayal. I was dealing with the possibility that this was coordinated, planned, and bigger, and the agent slid the paper toward me and tapped the last 4 digits of the second number, and I recognized it instantly, not from my phone, but from my memory, because it was printed on a family contact card that had been passed around at holidays like it meant trust, and my voice came out as a whisper. That's my mother's private line. And the agent nodded once, tight, and said, And that call said one thing that changes everything. And I felt my stomach drop again as he leaned in and added, "They told dispatch you'd hidden something in your children's room." When the agent said, "They told dispatch you'd hidden something in your children's room," my whole body went cold in a way that wasn't fear anymore. It was pure animal panic, because there's fear like I might get arrested, and then there's fear like my kids are about to be dragged into this. And that second kind makes your brain go feral. It makes you want to lunge, scream, rip apart the world. Anything to keep strangers from stepping into a child's safe place with suspicion in their eyes. I sat up so fast my knees almost hit the coffee table and I hissed, "No," like the word itself could slam a door shut, and the agent held his palm out, calm, commanding, "Stay seated," he said, and I hated him for a split second because in my mind, he wasn't protecting procedure. He was standing between me and my children. And then he said, quieter, more human, "Danielle, listen to me. They already told us the kids are secure and no threats were found. Nobody is going into a child's room yelling. Unless there's a verified imminent danger." Verified. That word mattered because my parents were trying to turn imagination into law enforcement action, and the sick part is they know exactly how the system reacts to certain words: device, explosive, children, threat. He tapped the call sheet with one finger like he was pinning a bug to a board. "This is what your mother said," he told me. "She said you moved it, and she said you moved it because you knew we were coming." I felt heat rush up my neck. "How would she know we were coming?" I snapped, and he looked at me for one beat and said, "Exactly." And then his radio chirped with an officer's voice, "Lead, hallway clear, kids calm, no suspicious items," and the agent nodded like he was confirming a theory. My head spun because my mother's claim wasn't just a lie, it was a trap designed to force a search into my kids' rooms, to make the night so traumatic that the memory sticks forever, and I could hear my older child whispering down the hall, "Mom," and my throat tightened. I tried to stand again, and the agent's voice hardened. "Sit." And I sat, shaking, furious, humiliated, while he turned slightly and spoke into his radio. "No further entry into kids' spaces unless I authorize it." And then he leaned down close enough that I could smell the faint scent of cold air and metal and whatever tactical gear smells like, and he said, "Your parents are trying to make us do something irreversible." And I swallowed hard because he was right. Once the kids see their bedroom treated like a crime scene, you don't undo that with an apology. He flipped the call sheet back over, ran a finger down the lines, and his jaw tightened. "They knew the response code," he murmured, almost to himself. "They used the right language to trigger it," and I stared at him. "What does that mean?" And he answered in a way that made my stomach sink deeper. "It means this wasn't a random emotional call," he said. "This was someone who wanted a forced entry and wanted it documented." Documented. Like a scrapbook of humiliation. Like proof they could use later. Then he asked me something that hit like a slap because it was so obvious, but I hadn't wanted to say it out loud. "What do your parents want from you?" he asked, and I blinked, because what do they want is such a simple question, and yet it unlocked a hallway of memories. My father insisting he should have a key to my house for emergencies. My mother trying to control my kids' school pickups. My father telling me I'm ungrateful when I don't fall in line. And then I remembered the last real fight. The one that happened at a family dinner months ago when I told them they were not allowed to post my kids online, and my father smiled like a man hearing a joke and said, "We're their grandparents, you don't get to set rules." And I'd said, "I do." And the room had gone quiet in that ugly way. I looked at the agent and said, "They want control." And he nodded like, "Yes, that's the correct answer." He stood and walked toward the hallway, not rushing, not dramatic, but with purpose, and he spoke softly to my kids, telling them they were safe, that everything was okay, that they were going to leave soon, and I hated that my children were being comforted by a stranger, because the people who should have protected them were the ones who summoned the danger. When he came back, he crouched again and said, "We're going to take your statement now." And he took out a small recorder, and the red light made my stomach flip, because suddenly this was real, official, and my parents' names were about to be attached to a night they could never fully spin away. He asked for basics first, my name, address, who lived here, any weapons, any history of threats, and then he asked the question that made my voice shake. "Tell me about your relationship with your parents." And I laughed once, bitter, because how do you summarize years of manipulation in a sentence without sounding dramatic? And I knew that's exactly what they count on, that you'll hesitate because you don't want to sound dramatic, so they get to keep being dangerous under the mask of family. So I decided to stop protecting their reputation with my silence. My father is controlling, I said, and the words came out like stones. He uses money, guilt, and image to control people, and when he doesn't get his way, he escalates, and the agent's pen moved steadily. And your mother, he asked, and my chest tightened, because my mother is the soft weapon, the one who cries while she helps him aim. My mother enables him, I said. She pretends it's love, but it's control with a smile, and that sentence made me feel sick and relieved at the same time. Then the agent asked, have they ever threatened to call authorities on you? And I didn't even need to think. Yes, I said. My father once told me he could make a few calls if I didn't cooperate, and the agent's eyes lifted to mine, sharp. What calls? He asked, and I swallowed. He said he had friends in places, and the agent nodded slowly, like he'd heard that kind of man before. One of the officers stepped in quietly and handed the agent a small printed slip, and I watched the agent read it, and his face went even colder. We've confirmed the calls originated from 2 different phones, he said, your father's line and your mother's line, and my stomach dropped because that meant there was no misunderstanding. No, maybe Dad panicked. No, Mom didn't know. They were both active. The agent leaned in slightly and said, Danielle, I need you to hear me clearly. And my throat tightened. Okay, I whispered. If your parents made a knowingly false report that triggered a tactical response to a home with children, he said, that is not a family dispute, that is a serious crime, and the word serious crime should have made me feel victorious, but they didn't, because victory isn't what you feel when your kids are shaking and your door is broken. What I felt was grief mixed with rage, like someone took a bat to the idea of parents and left the splinters in my living room. And then, like the universe wanted to twist the knife, my phone buzzed and buzzed again and buzzed a 3rd time, and the screen lit up with a name that made my chest seize. Dad. Calling. I stared at it like it was a snake on my coffee table. The agent saw it and held his hand out. Give me the phone, he said. I hesitated for half a second because part of me still wanted to keep family business private, and then I remembered that private is where they thrive. I handed it to him. He answered, put it on speaker, and my father's voice flooded the room again, irritated now, not polite, because he'd lost control of the narrative. Danielle, he snapped, what the hell is going on? Why are there vehicles leaving your house? Are they done? Did they find it? Did they find it? He said it like he expected my home to produce evidence on command, like he expected the world to rearrange to match his story. The agent didn't identify himself immediately. He let my father talk, because talk is how liars expose motive. Mr. Harper, the agent said calmly, this is the lead on scene. My father's tone shifted instantly into performance again. Officer, thank God, he said. I've been trying to protect my grandchildren. My daughter is unstable. Unstable again, right on schedule. The agent asked, Mr. Harper, why are you calling her directly after you reported her as an imminent threat? My father scoffed, because I'm her father, and the agent replied, if you believed she had an explosive device in a home with children, you would not be calling her to check progress. You would be cooperating with the investigation and staying away from interference. Interference. That word made my father bristle. I don't appreciate your tone, he said. The agent's voice stayed flat. I don't appreciate false reports that put children at risk, he replied. There was a pause, a crack in my father's smoothness. Are you accusing me? He demanded, and the agent said, I'm documenting the facts. And then my father did the most revealing thing of all. He didn't ask if my kids were okay. He didn't ask if I was hurt. He didn't sound relieved nobody died. He asked, sharp as a knife, did you search the kids' rooms? My skin crawled. Because that question wasn't about safety, it was about whether his trap worked. The agent went quiet for a beat, then said, no, and my father's voice snapped, why not? And I felt my stomach turn because there it was again, control, entitlement, the belief he can order law enforcement like employees. The agent's response was calm and lethal. Because your statements are inconsistent and your residence layout description was inaccurate, he said, and because I'm not traumatizing children to satisfy a claim you cannot prove. My father's breathing sounded heavier. "You're making a mistake," he said low, and my mother's voice suddenly appeared in the background, tense and urgent. "Thomas, stop talking," and my father ignored her. "Put Danielle on," he demanded. The agent looked at me, and I shook my head once, not dramatic, just done, and the agent said, "No." Again, that same word that felt like a door slamming on my father's control for the first time in my life. My father erupted, "She's my daughter," and the agent replied, "She is not your property." And I swear, that sentence hit me harder than the door breach because nobody had ever said that to him. My father went quiet, and when he spoke again, his voice was chillingly calm. "Fine," he said. "Then I'll handle this my way." The agent's eyes narrowed. "Explain what you mean," he said. My father didn't answer directly. He said, "You people don't understand who you're dealing with." And then he added, like he was dropping a card on the table, "I called the agency because local law enforcement never takes family threats seriously." The agency. The word hung there. The agent's posture changed slightly, like a man hearing a claim he now has to verify, and he asked, "What agency?" And my father said it like he was proud, like he was announcing a promotion, CIA, and my throat tightened because that one word is a grenade in the mind of anyone watching, and in that moment I understood what my father was doing. He was using a bigger, scarier label to amplify the fear and the authority and the humiliation, and the agent didn't argue. He just said, "Mr. Harper, you are not authorized to direct any federal resources, and false reporting to any agency is a serious matter." And my father laughed cold. "We'll see," he said, and then the line went dead. The agent stared at my phone for a second, then looked at me and said, "Now I need you to tell me the one thing you've been avoiding," and my stomach dropped. "What?" I whispered. He leaned in and asked, "What would make your parents willing to risk your kid's safety to manufacture a threat?" And I opened my mouth to say control again, but something else flashed in my memory. Something I hadn't wanted to connect because it made the story even uglier. The legal folder I'd hidden in my bedroom dresser. The one with custody notes and estate paperwork and the letter from my father's attorney months ago that I never replied to. And my blood ran cold because I suddenly saw the real motive. Not just emotional control, but money and legacy and access. And before I could answer, the agent's radio crackled with a new message that made every hair on my arms lift. "Lead," dispatch said, "We just got a call from a federal liaison. They want to confirm your report, and they say the reporting party is requesting a second team." The moment dispatch said, "Federal liaison wants to confirm your report, and the reporting party is requesting a second team," the air in my living room changed again. Like we'd survived the first wave, and now the ocean was pulling back for something worse, and I watched the lead agent's face go completely still. Not panicked, not impressed. Just irritated in that controlled way people get when they realize someone is trying to hijack a system they take seriously. He didn't answer dispatch right away. He turned his head and looked at me like, "You heard that too?" And I swear my brain did this wild thing where it started flashing through every possible consequence in under 2 seconds, like a slideshow of worst-case scenarios. My kids getting pulled out of bed again, neighbors filming, my name trending in a local Facebook group as that unstable mom, the school getting a call, CPS showing up, my job finding out, my entire life turning into a permanent suspicion stain because my parents decided to play puppet master with people who carry guns. The agent pressed his radio and said, calm but sharp, "Dispatch, confirm." Who initiated the liaison contact? Dispatch replied, "Reporting party called in again, escalated to federal concern, requesting additional resources." The agent's jaw tightened just enough to be visible. "Copy," he said, and then he did something that scared and comforted me at the same time. He looked at another officer and said, "No one leaves until we lock this down," because that meant we were not done, and when law enforcement says you're not done, your nervous system doesn't get to rest. He walked to my doorway, stepped over splinters, and scanned the street like he was checking for a second wave, and all I could think was, my father is sitting somewhere right now feeling proud of himself, like he's winning, like he just leveled up in a video game, and I wanted to grab my phone and scream at him, but the lead agent held my phone like evidence, not a family lifeline. And that made me realize the only way out of a war with manipulators is to stop treating it like a misunderstanding. He came back in, crouched in front of me again, and his voice dropped low. "Danielle," he said, Your father used the word CIA to create fear. That doesn't mean federal agents are about to kick your door again. It means he's trying to force the conversation into a bigger arena where he thinks he can intimidate everyone. I swallowed hard and my voice came out rough. He's not bluffing. He believes he can. The agent nodded once like, yeah, I know that type. Then we make his confidence his problem, he said, and he turned to an officer and asked for body cam confirmation, timestamps, everything. He was building a paper wall between my kids and my parents' chaos. Then he pointed at the call sheet again and asked me, you mentioned a legal folder. Custody or estate? I froze because that folder had felt like a private anxiety thing, not a motive, and I hated that he could see it so clearly, but I also felt relief because finally someone with authority was taking the pattern seriously. I swallowed and said, estate, and the word tasted like shame, not because estate is shameful, but because it's humiliating to admit your own parents might be willing to sacrifice your peace for inheritance politics. I continued anyway, because silence is the drug they feed on. My father's been pushing me to sign paperwork. I said, power of attorney language, guardianship talk if something happens to him. And when I said no, he started saying I'm unstable, that I'm emotional, that I can't handle responsibility. The agent's eyes narrowed. And the kids, he said. He wants access, I admitted. He wants to be able to take them whenever, post them, control holidays, control school. When I set boundaries, he turned it into a war. The agent leaned back slightly and exhaled through his nose. So this is about leverage, he said, not safety. And right then, like my parents were listening through the walls, my phone buzzed again in the agent's hand, and he angled it so I could see the screen.
Mom.
Calling. I felt my stomach drop because my mother never calls this late unless she's about to perform, and my brain flashed back to that whisper I heard earlier on the speaker line. Make sure they go all the way in, the way she said it like she was ordering someone to check a closet. The agent answered, speaker on, and my mother's voice flooded the room, breathy and urgent, dripping with fake fear. Hello? Thank God, she said. Officer, please tell me my daughter is okay. I'm terrified. Terrified. She said that while my door was in pieces. The agent didn't play along. Ma'am, he said, identify yourself. This is Linda Harper, she said, and then she immediately pivoted into the performance. My daughter has been spiraling. She's been keeping the kids from us. She's making threats. The agent's tone stayed flat. Ma'am, your earlier call claimed an explosive device and a threat to shoot responding officers. My mother sighed like she was the victim. I didn't want it to come to this, she said, but Thomas and I had to do something. We're their grandparents. There it was again, that entitlement dressed up as love. The agent asked, what direct evidence do you have tonight? My mother hesitated and then did the classic move. She tried to weaponize emotion instead of facts. She's not the same, she whispered. She's not stable. She's moody. She's angry. The agent said, that is not evidence. My mother's voice sharpened slightly. So, you're just going to ignore us? Ignore us? Like she's complaining to a manager. The agent replied, ma'am, you just triggered a tactical response to a home with children. Your call is being treated as a potential false report. My mother gasped, loud, theatrical. False report? How dare you? And then, because she couldn't help herself, she let the truth slip through her teeth. We were trying to get you to search, she said. We know she hides things. The agent went still. Search where? He asked. And my mother, thinking she was being smart, said, the kids' rooms. That's where she'd hide it if she had it. I felt my hands start shaking again, because hearing her say my kids' rooms out loud made me feel like my skin didn't fit. The agent said coldly, ma'am, do you understand what you just said? My mother snapped back, don't twist my words. The agent replied, your words are recorded. My mother's voice went low and angry, the real her slipping out. Put my daughter on, she demanded. The agent looked at me. I shook my head. He told her, no, and my mother's anger flared. She's my daughter. The agent's response was simple. She is not required to speak to you. My mother exhaled, sharp, and then she tried a new tactic that hit me like a slap because it was the deepest weapon in the family, the moral blame. "We raised her," she hissed. "We sacrificed for her, and this is how she repays us." The agent didn't bite. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm going to ask you directly. Did you knowingly provide exaggerated or false information to dispatch to trigger an emergency response?" My mother went quiet for half a beat. And then she said something that made my stomach turn because it was so close to a confession without being one. "We said what we needed to say to get someone to take it seriously," she murmured. There it was. Not truth. Strategy. What we needed to say. The agent's eyes flicked to me, and I knew he heard the same thing I heard. Intent. He said, "Ma'am, you do not get to manufacture facts to force law enforcement action." My mother's voice rose, and behind her, faintly, I heard my father in the background, angry, telling her what to say, like he was directing a scene. "Tell them she's dangerous," he barked, and my mother, trying to stay sweet, said, "She is dangerous. She's unstable." The agent said, "Ma'am, I'm ending this call. Do not contact this number again." And my mother snapped, "You can't end a call from a mother." Like motherhood was a badge that makes you immune to consequences. The agent ended it anyway, and the silence after was loud. He stared at the blank screen, then looked at me and said, "Okay. Now we have her admission on a recorded line that they escalated to force a search." I swallowed hard. "So what happens now?" I asked. And he didn't give me fantasy, he gave me reality. "Now we write it clean," he said, "and we push it up the chain." Then he leaned closer and said, "Danielle, I need you to think like they think for a second. Your father isn't done." My throat tightened. "What do you mean?" He nodded toward the broken door like it was a warning sign. "This was the first play," he said. "They wanted you scared, discredited, and compliant. When that doesn't work, they go for your reputation and your access to your kids." I felt the words CPS flash in my head like a neon sign, and he saw it on my face. "Exactly," he said, "and that's why I'm telling you right now we document everything before they can spin it." He had an officer take photos of the door, the entryway, the scene, the time, the kids being present without showing their faces, and he kept saying chain of custody like it was a prayer because in a fight like this, receipts are your armor. Then he turned to dispatch and asked for the federal liaison contact details, not because he was scared of the word CIA, but because he wanted to shut down the escalation officially. And as he spoke, I heard the softest sound down the hall, my younger child whispering, "Mommy," and I stood before anyone could stop me, and this time the agent didn't bark at me to sit, he just nodded, because he knew a parent has to be a parent, and I walked down the hallway slowly, past the nightlight glow, and I opened the door to my child's room and saw two small faces wet with tears, cheeks flushed, eyes wide like they were trying to understand a world that doesn't make sense. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled them close, and my kid asked, voice tiny, "Are they taking you?" And my throat burned, but I smiled anyway, because sometimes you have to lie gently to protect innocence. "No," I whispered. "I'm right here." And as I held them, I felt something hard settle inside my chest, not hate, not revenge, something colder and cleaner, resolve. Because if my parents were willing to weaponize fear in front of my kids, then the relationship wasn't just broken, it was unsafe, and love does not get a pass to be unsafe. When I went back to the living room, Daniel wasn't there yet, because in this version of my life he's not my shield, the system is, and the agent was on the phone with someone higher up, using words like false reporting, child endangerment, and manufactured threat, and then he hung up and looked at me and said, "Good news and bad news." I swallowed. "Good news," he said. "The liaison confirmed there is no federal team en route based solely on your father's request." My shoulders dropped a fraction. "Bad news," he continued. "Your father has already started his next move." "What?" I whispered. The agent slid his phone across the coffee table, opened to a voicemail notification, and he said, "He left this message with someone." And then he met my eyes and added, "And it's the kind of message that can trigger a different kind of response." And my stomach dropped because I knew exactly what that meant, not agents at the door, but people in suits, social workers, school administrators. The kind of response that doesn't kick your door in, it slowly cages your life, and as the agent pressed play, my father's voice filled the room again, calm and calculated, saying, "I need to report concern for the welfare of my grandchildren." And I realized with sick clarity that the night raid wasn't the end of my parents' betrayal, it was the opening act. The second the agent hit play, and my father's voice calmly said, "I need to report concern for the welfare of my grandchildren," my stomach dropped in a completely different way because door-kicking chaos is loud and obvious, but welfare concern is quiet poison. It crawls into your life wearing a suit and a clipboard, and it never announces itself as revenge. It announces itself as care. The agent paused the voicemail like he couldn't stand hearing another second of it without context, and he looked at me and said, "This is the pivot." And I didn't even ask what he meant because I already knew. When manipulators realize fear didn't make you submit, they switch to systems that can pressure you without ever touching you: schools, employers, courts, child services, all the places where you have to prove you're innocent while they just have to sound concerned. He rewound and played it again, and this time I listened like it was a crime documentary about my own life. My father's tone measured, warm, almost sad. "My daughter has been unstable. She's having episodes. The children may not be safe. I'm requesting a welfare check and intervention." And I swear the most enraging part wasn't the words. It was how practiced he sounded, like he'd been waiting his whole life to say them. Then the agent hit stop and said, "Danielle, I want you to answer one question honestly." And my throat tightened. "Okay." And he asked, "Has anyone ever looked at you and believed him over you?" And my mind immediately flashed to a family reunion 2 years ago when my father told a story about me being overly emotional, and everyone laughed like it was charming, and I smiled to keep peace even while I felt small, and then it flashed to my ex's mother saying, "Your dad seems like such a good man," and my dad smiling like a politician, and I realized I'd been living under his credibility umbrella my entire life. And umbrellas feel like shelter until the day someone uses them to block the sun from your face. I swallowed hard and said, "Yes," and the agent nodded once, like that confirmed his next move. "Then we don't treat this like a family argument," he said. "We treat this like a coordinated attempt to manufacture records against you." Manufacture records. The phrase made my skin crawl because it's exactly what it was. My parents weren't calling because they believed something, they were calling to create paper. The agent stood up and began giving instructions like he was building a barricade. "I need photos of the door, the lock, the entry, timestamps, and I need your statement signed." And then he looked at me and said, "Do you have any texts, voicemails, anything where your parents threatened to report you or take your kids?" I nodded because yes, of course I did. Because people like my father leave little warning flags and then pretend you're crazy for seeing them. I opened my phone with shaking hands and pulled up an old thread where my father wrote, "If you keep disrespecting us, we will do what's necessary." And my mother added a separate message, "You're going to regret keeping the children from their family." And the agent's face tightened as he watched the screen. "Screenshot these," he said, "send them to this email." And he handed me a card. And that card felt like the first real weapon I'd ever been given in my own life. Then he asked, "Do your parents have keys?" And I answered too fast, "No," because I'd changed the locks after my father tried to borrow my spare one day, and the agent nodded like he'd already assumed it. "Good," he said, "because the next escalation is them showing up in person and trying to bait you into looking unstable."
Bait.
That word hit hard because my father loves bait. He'll say something cruel just to get a reaction, and then he points and goes, "See, she's unstable." The agent told me, "From now on, your parents do not get voice access," and I stared at him. "What do you mean?" And he said, "No phone calls, no arguments, no emotional conversations. Everything is written. Everything is documented." Then he made me repeat it back like a drill. Everything in writing, and I did, and it felt weirdly empowering, like I was finally stepping out of the fog and into daylight. A few hours later, when the tactical team finally left, my house was quieter but not peaceful. It felt like a crime scene that had been politely cleaned up, and my kids were exhausted in that fragile way where they try to act normal, but their eyes keep checking the hallway like danger might return. I made them breakfast they barely ate. kept my voice light while my insides were still vibrating, and then my phone buzzed again. Not my parents, a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered, a woman's calm voice said, "Hi, this is Child Protective Services. We received a report requesting a welfare check." And my vision blurred for half a second because even when you've done nothing wrong, those words drop on you like a boulder. I forced my voice steady. "I understand," I said, and I heard my own heartbeat as loud as the door breach in my memory. The worker's tone stayed professional. "We need to ensure the children are safe and the home environment is stable," and I wanted to scream. The only unstable thing in this house is the grandparents who sent armed men into it, but I didn't, because I could already hear my father's voice in my head coaching the narrative. She's emotional, she's angry, she's unstable. So I did the opposite. I went calm. I went polite. I went controlled. "You're welcome to come," I said, "but I also need you to know law enforcement forcibly entered my home last night due to a false report that originated from my parents, and a report is being filed for that." There was a pause on the line, just long enough that I knew the worker's brain had to switch lanes because this wasn't the simple story my father wanted her to hear. "You said law enforcement entered your home," she repeated, and I said, "Yes, I have incident numbers, a statement, photos, and the officer's contact information." And that's when the first tiny crack appeared in my parents' plan, because systems love documentation more than they love emotion, and my father's whole strategy relies on sounding like the credible one while making me look messy. The CPS worker asked when she could come, and I gave her a time later that afternoon, not because I wanted strangers in my home, but because I refused to look like I was hiding. Then I called the agent's number on the card, and he answered like he'd been waiting. "They called you," he said, not a question. "Yes," I whispered. "Good," he replied. "That means your father did exactly what we predicted, and now we do exactly what we planned." He told me to keep everything factual, show the kids' rooms, show food in the fridge, show the school routine, no over-explaining, and then he said something that made my blood run cold again. "Your father may also call your job."
My job.
That word made my chest tighten because that's where grown-up life collapses. You can survive a family betrayal, but if they poison your income, they poison your stability, and stability is what keeps kids safe. I whispered he wouldn't, and the agent's response was immediate. "He already has," and my stomach dropped. He told me my father had left a voicemail with an employer contact line claiming I was under investigation and potentially dangerous. Dangerous. That word again. My fingers went numb. "How did he even get that?" I asked, and the agent didn't sugarcoat it. "Family knows your life," he said. "They know where to strike." Then he told me to do something that felt backwards but was actually smart. He said, "You call HR first." So I did. I called my company's HR, hands still shaking, and I said calmly, "I want to proactively report harassment and false allegations from family members that may attempt to contact the company." And HR's tone changed from polite to alert, because companies hate liability, and suddenly my father wasn't a worried grandparent. He was a risk. HR asked for documentation, and I said, "I can provide incident numbers and officer contact." And they agreed to block unknown callers and route anything suspicious to security. One small shield. Then I called a lawyer, because if you're listening right now and your stomach is turning because you've lived through family manipulation like this, hear me clearly, love doesn't protect you from paperwork. Paperwork protects you from love that turned violent. The lawyer's voice was blunt. "You need a restraining order or protective order if your parents escalate." And I said, "They already did." And she told me to start a binder, dates, times, screenshots, police report numbers, photos, everything. A binder. It sounded so boring for something so traumatic, but boring is how you win against people who want drama. That afternoon, the CPS worker arrived, and I'll tell you something that might surprise you. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't out to take my kids. She was just doing her job, and that's exactly why my father chose her, because he can hide behind. I was just concerned. She walked through the house, looked at the kids, asked them gentle questions, checked sleeping arrangements, checked food, checked basic safety, and the whole time I kept thinking about how my father imagined the scene. He imagined me crying and yelling. He imagined the kids saying something messy. He imagined a report that said unstable household, but what he got was a calm mother with receipts. I handed the worker the incident number, the officer's card, the photos of the broken door, and I said, "This is the environment my parents created." And the worker's eyebrows lifted just slightly, the first human reaction, because even trained professionals feel something when they hear grandparents triggered an armed response. She asked, "Why would they do that?" And I answered with the most honest sentence I'd ever said out loud, "Because I set boundaries, and they can't tolerate not being in control." The worker nodded slowly and said, "I'm going to document that." And those 4 words felt like the first real consequence my father couldn't charm away. After she left, my kids looked at me like they were waiting for the grown-up world to explain itself, and my older one asked, "Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at us?" And my throat burned because kids always think they caused it, and I said, "No," softly, "this is not your fault." And inside I added, "And it never was." Later that night my phone buzzed again. And this time it wasn't a caseworker or HR or an officer, it was my mother, texting from a new number like she was sneaking into my life through a window. "We need to talk," she wrote. And then my father's message came right after, like a threat wrapped in family language. "You're humiliating us. Humiliating us."
Not sorry. Not are the kids okay?
Not "we made a mistake." Humiliating us. And I want you to answer this in your head before you even type it in the comments. Did my parents cross a line so deep there's no coming back? Or do you believe blood gives people unlimited chances? Because I know what they taught us growing up. Forgive, forgive, forgive. But nobody taught us what to do when forgiveness becomes permission. I didn't reply. I screenshotted. I sent it to my lawyer. I forwarded it to the agent. And then, just as I thought the night might finally calm, a notification popped up on my phone that made my blood turn to ice again. A school app message. "Emergency contact update requested." And when I opened it, I saw a request submitted under my father's name asking to be added as an authorized pickup person for my children, and the message included a note. "Mother is currently unstable. We are intervening." And in that exact second, with my kids asleep and my door still patched and my chest still sore from fear, I realized my parents weren't trying to scare me anymore. They were trying to take pieces of my life one system at a time, and I grabbed my keys because I wasn't going to wait for morning to find out how far they'd already gone. I didn't even put my jacket on properly. I just slid my feet into shoes, grabbed my keys, and stepped outside into that cold early morning air that feels too quiet for the kind of war you're fighting, and my porch light hit the plywood patch on my door, and it made my stomach twist again because it was physical proof that last night wasn't a bad dream. It was a real thing that happened to real kids in a real house. And now my parents were trying to turn that trauma into paperwork that could follow us for years. I drove to the school like I was on autopilot, hands tight on the steering wheel, checking the rearview mirror like I expected headlights to appear behind me, and I kept hearing my father's words in my head, humiliating us, like my safety and my children's safety were just social inconvenience to him. The school parking lot was empty except for one custodian truck and the faint glow from a security light, and I sat in my car for 1 second too long because a part of me didn't want to walk into a building where my parents might have already planted their version of me like a rumor. Then I remembered the rule the agent gave me: don't argue, document, and I got out. The front doors were locked, but there was a buzzer, and when I pressed it, a sleepy voice answered, and I forced my tone calm. "This is Danielle Harper. I need to speak to whoever handles emergency contacts immediately." And when they tried to tell me to come back during office hours, something in my chest went cold and steady. "This is urgent," I said. "There is an active attempt to change pickup authorization under false pretenses." That phrase, false pretenses, worked like a key because schools understand liability better than they understand family drama. A minute later, the door clicked, and I stepped inside into fluorescent light that made everything look too real, and the receptionist's face tightened when she saw me. Not angry, more concerned, like she could feel the energy coming off me. "What's going on?" she asked, and I didn't tell her the whole story. I gave her the part that matters to institutions. "My parents are attempting to add themselves as authorized pickup," I said. "They are not authorized, and they have made false reports to law enforcement." Her eyes widened slightly. "Who is your emergency contact currently?" she asked, and I named my brother and my neighbor and myself, and then she said, "We got a request late last night," and my jaw tightened. "Show me." I said, and she hesitated because people hate confrontation, and I could see she didn't want to be in the middle, but that's exactly where my parents shove people into the middle, and then they watch you look unstable for reacting. I lowered my voice and said, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to stop a security breach, and that phrase flipped the situation into something she could handle without emotion. She pulled up the request on her screen and turned it so I could see it, and there it was, my father's name typed out like he belonged in my child's day. There was also a note attached, the same phrase from the app, Mother is currently unstable. We are intervening. I felt my face heat up, but I kept my voice even because the moment I yelled, I become his story. Please print that, I said, and she glanced at me like she didn't expect calm. She expected drama, and I realized my father had trained people to expect drama from me by labeling me dramatic before I even entered rooms. She printed it, and the paper felt hot in my hand. Then I asked the next question like a knife. What number did it come from? And she pointed to the record, and it wasn't just my father's number, it was an email address that included his full name and my mother's middle initial, like they were branding the lie together. I said, lock my children's pickup list, and she asked, what do you mean? And I said, no changes without in-person verification and photo ID, and I want an alert on the account. And she nodded, typing fast now because she could sense the seriousness. Then she said, they also called. And that sentence made my blood drop. Who called? I asked, and she looked uncomfortable. A man and a woman, she said. They said they were the grandparents. They said there was a family emergency and the children might be in danger. My chest tightened. Did they ask for the kids' schedule? I asked, and she hesitated, and I already knew the answer. They asked what time dismissal was, she admitted, and they asked if the kids had any appointments today. My fingers went cold because that wasn't concern, that was logistics. That was planning. That was the same energy as my mother whispering make sure they go all the way in, except now it was make sure we can get them. I forced myself to breathe through my nose and said, did you give them anything? And she shook her head quickly. No, we said we can't release information. And I exhaled a fraction. Good, I said, because I need you to treat them like strangers. She flinched at the word strangers, but it was true, and the truth is often the most offensive thing you can say in a family war. I asked to speak to the principal, and within minutes a sleepy but alert administrator walked in, hair slightly messy, coffee in hand, and the second she saw my face and the paper in my hand, her posture changed into protect and contain mode. Miss Harper, she said carefully, what's happening? I told her the clean version, the version that can be written down. Last night, law enforcement forcibly entered my home due to a false report initiated by my parents. I said, there is an incident number and an ongoing investigation, and now they are attempting to access my children through the school system. The principal's eyebrows lifted. Do you have documentation? She asked, and I slid the incident number, the officer's card, and the printed request across her desk, and the moment her eyes landed on the note calling me unstable, her mouth tightened. We take unauthorized pickup very seriously, she said, and I nodded. So, do I? She asked if there were custody orders, and I said, I have full custody. And she said, then we can block them entirely, and I felt a wave of relief that made my eyes sting. But relief didn't last because then she added, however, if they come here with a police officer, it can complicate things. My stomach flipped. They will try, I said, and the principal asked, why would your parents do that? And that question, asked by a woman who probably sees every kind of family problem, hit me like a reality check, because normal people cannot compute parents who treat grandchildren like trophies to win. I answered honestly, because I set boundaries and they can't tolerate losing, and the principal held my gaze for a second like she was deciding if she believed me, and I realized this is what my father counts on, that the world will assume parents are well-meaning by default and that the child must be overreacting. So I went one step further. They used the word explosive. I said quietly, they claimed I had a device in my home to trigger forced entry. This is not normal conflict. The principal's face hardened. Okay, she said, then we treat this as a security issue. Security issue. That phrase felt like armor. She called the school resource officer, and a uniformed officer arrived, serious, awake now, and when I told him what happened, his jaw tightened in that way men get when they realize children were used as leverage. He asked for the officer's name from last night, and I told him, and he nodded like he recognized it. And suddenly, I wasn't just a mom with a dramatic story, I was a case with cross-confirmed personnel. The resource officer said, "If they show up, we do not release the children." And the principal said, "Not without court paperwork." And I felt my chest unclench a little for the first time since 2:03 a.m. But then my phone buzzed, and I looked down and saw a new email notification from an address I didn't recognize, subject line, "Notice of intent," and my blood went cold. I opened it, and it was from a law firm, not my law firm, theirs. It was written in that polished legal voice that tries to scare you without making direct threats, and it said they were concerned for the welfare of the minors and that temporary guardianship options were being explored due to documented instability, and that they were requesting cooperation to avoid formal proceedings. Cooperation. Formal proceedings. Documented instability. My hand started shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone, because this was the second wave, not door-kicking chaos, but paperwork warfare, and my father was using the same tactic he always uses, build a narrative where his control looks like protection, and my resistance looks like danger. The principal leaned closer, read the email over my shoulder, and her face tightened. "Do you have an attorney?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. The resource officer said, "Forward that to your attorney and to the investigator," and I nodded. Then he added, "Also forward it to us," and I blinked. "Why?" And he said, "Because if they try to use the school as a handoff point, we need to know they're actively pursuing it." Actively pursuing it. That phrase made me want to vomit, because they weren't just angry, they were mobilized. I forwarded the email, and my lawyer responded within minutes like she'd been expecting this. "Do not reply," she wrote. "We respond through counsel only, and we file for an emergency protective order today." Emergency protective order. I stared at those words and felt a strange mix of grief and clarity, because nobody grows up dreaming about filing protective orders against their parents, but nobody grows up dreaming about tactical lights in their living room either, and yet here we are. I left the school with a written security note attached to my children's file, and as I walked back to my car, I felt eyes on me, not people, just the sensation of being watched, and I turned and saw a vehicle parked across the street, engine running, windows tinted. My heart slammed into my throat because paranoia feels identical to pattern recognition when you've been targeted. The car didn't move, just sat there, and then my phone buzzed again with a text from a new number. No hello, no love, just a sentence that made my blood turn to ice. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." That was my father. No question. That was his voice in text form, the same voice that said go find something, the same voice that asked did you search the kids' rooms, the same voice that never once asked if the children were okay. I didn't reply. I screenshotted it, sent it to my lawyer, and then I called the lead agent. He answered on the second ring and said, "Tell me what happened," and I told him about the school, the pickup request, the law firm email, the parked car, the threat text. There was a pause, and then he said something that made my skin go cold all over again. "Danielle," he said, "that second team your father requested," and my stomach dropped. "Yeah," I whispered. "What about it?" His voice tightened. "It wasn't about the CIA," he said. "It was about getting another report number from a different agency to stack against you." Stack against you. Paper. Records. Narrative. And then he added, "And I just got word your parents are on their way to your house right now." When the agent said, "Your parents are on their way to your house right now," my entire body went into that cold, hyper-focus mode where your brain stops being emotional and starts being logistical, because the moment they show up in person, they get to create a new scene, a new witness set, a new rumor trail, and I could already picture it, my father standing on my porch looking concerned, my mother crying loud enough for neighbors to hear, and if I react like a normal human being who's been terrorized, they'll point and say, "See, unstable." And suddenly, I'm not a mother protecting her kids, I'm a spectacle they engineered. I gripped my phone so hard my fingertips hurt and said, "What do I do?" And the agent's voice stayed steady like a hand on your shoulder. "You do not engage," he said. "You do not open that door. You do not step onto the porch. You let them hang themselves on camera." On camera. That's when I remembered my doorbell camera, and for the first time in hours I felt something close to relief because my father can charm people in person, but he can't charm a timestamp. "Are you at home?" the agent asked. "I'm in the school parking lot," I said, and he replied, "Good. Stay away. Go somewhere public, somewhere safe, and do not tell anyone where you are." My chest tightened because it felt insane to hide from my own parents like they were strangers, but then I remembered the receptionist saying they asked about dismissal time, and that snapped it into focus. This isn't about family, it's about access. I drove to a grocery store parking lot because it was bright, busy, and covered in cameras, and I sat there with my engine running, hands shaking, staring at my phone as notification after notification popped up like my life was being invaded through the screen. First, a new voicemail from an unknown number. Then, an email from my mother's private line. Then, a text from my father again. "Open the door. We need to talk." Need to talk like he didn't just send a tactical team into my living room. I didn't answer. I screenshotted. I forwarded. I did exactly what the agent told me, and I hated how good I was getting at treating my own parents like a threat profile. Then my doorbell app pinged. Motion detected. My stomach flipped. I tapped it, and there they were, right on my porch, framed by the stupid little wreath I'd hung for the holidays because I used to believe in normal. My father in his nice coat, posture straight like he was arriving to fix something, my mother holding a tissue like a prop, and behind them a third figure, a man I didn't recognize at first until he stepped into the light, and I saw the laminated badge on a lanyard. Not police, not CPS, something administrative. The kind of person my father collects like trophies. My throat went dry. "They brought someone," I whispered, and the agent's voice tightened. "Describe him." "Badge, clipboard," I said, "not uniform." The agent exhaled through his nose, controlled anger. "They're trying to create an official moment," he said. "A witness to say you refused cooperation." Refused cooperation. I stared at the camera feed and watched my father press the doorbell once, then twice. Then he leaned toward the lens and smiled like he was performing for an audience. He knew the camera was there. He wanted the recording. He said, loud and calm, "Danielle, it's Dad. We're here because we love you. Open the door. We're worried about the kids." He emphasized the kids like it was a weapon. My mother stepped forward and did her part, voice trembling. "Sweetheart, please, we just want to help." Help. That word again, the word that always means control. Then the third man stepped closer, and my father turned slightly toward him, gesturing to my door like, "You see what I deal with?" And the man knocked with a polite firmness that made my stomach turn because politeness can still be coercion. My father's voice rose, just enough for neighbors to hear. "We're not leaving until we know the children are safe." The children are safe. The lie sat on my porch like poison. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped my phone, and I wanted to scream into the camera, "My children are safe from everyone except you," but I didn't because the agent was right. The trap is interaction. The trap is you giving them a clip. They want the moment where you crack. They want a raised voice. They want a slammed door. They want you to look like the story they already told. I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot watching my parents perform concern outside my empty house, and I felt something shift inside me, something clean and hard, because it hit me that they didn't come to check on anyone, they came to be seen checking, and that difference is the entire crime. The agent said, "Do you have exterior audio?" And I said, "Yes," and he replied, "Good. Let it record." Then my phone buzzed with a new call, and my chest tightened when I saw the caller ID. Private number. My body knew before my brain did. This is my father trying another angle, calling from a blocked line because he wants to say something ugly without it tracing back as easily. I didn't answer. The agent didn't tell me to answer. He told me, "Send it to voicemail." I did, and within seconds the voicemail arrived, and my father's voice filled my speaker like a threat wrapped in righteousness. "Danielle," he said, low and furious now. "You are making this worse. You are embarrassing this family. If you don't cooperate, we will escalate. Do you think you can keep the kids from us? You can't. We will do this the hard way." The hard way. My blood turned to ice because it matched the text, and that means intent. And intent is what courts care about. And intent is what my father never expects anyone to capture because he's used to saying things in private and then denying them in public. The agent's voice went colder. "Forward that to me," he said, "right now."
I did.
Then I watched the camera feed again and saw my father turn to the third man and hand him a paper, and the man looked at it and nodded slowly, like he was reading something official. My father had brought documents to my porch at dawn like he was serving me with control. My mother wiped a fake tear and looked directly into the camera lens, not at my door, at the lens, like she was talking to an invisible jury. "We tried," she said softly. "We tried to help her." That sentence made my stomach twist because it wasn't for me, it was for whoever watches later. It was for school staff, neighbors, maybe even a judge someday, proof they showed up. Then my father did the boldest thing yet. He turned to the street and waved at someone off camera, and two neighbors I barely know approached, curious, concerned, and my father started talking to them with that warm community voice, the voice that makes strangers trust him in 30 seconds. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard enough. "We're worried. She's been acting strange. The kids. We're trying to get her help." And I felt this hot rage rise in my chest because he was poisoning my neighborhood like it was nothing, like my reputation was just collateral. The agent said, "This is good." And I almost laughed because what could possibly be good? And he said, "Because now he's creating witnesses to his own harassment. This is stalking behavior when it's repeated and unwanted, and you have already told him not to contact you." Stalking. That word hit hard because it's usually reserved for exes and strangers, not parents. But abusive parents aren't special. They're just familiar. Then the agent added, "I have units heading to your residence," and my heart slammed. "I don't want another scene," I whispered, and he replied, "You didn't choose this scene. They did." I watched as my father knocked again, harder, and the third man stepped back like he didn't like how aggressive it was getting, and my mother's face tightened because even she could feel it slipping from controlled performance into obvious intimidation. Then I saw a car pull up on the camera feed, not marked, just a plain vehicle, and two officers stepped out, and the way my father's posture changed was instant, like a man switching costumes mid-play. He went from aggressive to polite, hands open, smile ready, and he began talking to the officers like old friends. "Thank you for coming. We're concerned. We just want to check." And I wanted to vomit. The officer held up a hand, not rude, just authoritative, and I saw something I'd never seen in my father's life, him being told to pause. The officer gestured toward the third man, asked a question, and the third man handed over the paper, and the officer looked at it for a long time. My father talked, my mother sniffled, the neighbors hovered like gossip moths, and then the officer shook his head. Even through a grainy camera feed, I could feel the shift, because the officer handed the paper back and said something that made my father's smile freeze. The officer pointed toward the street, then pointed away, the universal get off the property motion. My father's hands lifted slightly in disbelief, like he couldn't comprehend being denied. My mother's mouth fell open. The neighbors leaned in. And then my father did what he always does when he's losing. He tried to argue. He stepped forward. The officer stepped forward too, just half a step, enough to say, "Not today." My father's face tightened, and even from a distance, I could see the anger in his jaw. The officer spoke again, and my father finally backed up, but not like a man who accepted consequences, like a man who was storing revenge. My mother turned toward the camera lens again and said, "Louder now. We tried." And one neighbor touched her arm sympathetically, and I felt my throat burn because my mother's performance was working on strangers. And then the officer pointed directly at the doorbell camera, and my father's eyes flicked to it like he remembered he was being recorded, and he forced his face into a smile again. And he said something that made my skin crawl because it was both a threat and a prophecy. He looked straight into the lens and said, "We'll be back when she's ready to be reasonable." Reasonable. That's their favorite word. Reasonable means surrender. My hands shook, my chest felt tight, and I looked down at my phone and saw the agent texting me a single line that felt like the beginning of the endgame. "We have enough now to file the emergency order today." And before we go further, I need you to tell me something in the comments because I want to see where people stand on this. If your own parents use the system to scare you, smear you, and reach your kids, would you still believe in family loyalty? Or would you treat it like what it is? Betrayal with a bloodline. And also, from our stats, we've got more viewers outpacing subscribers. Kindly join our community. Thank you, alright? Because stories like this don't just entertain, they teach you how manipulation really works in the real world, and you're going to want the next update when this gets even uglier. I sat there in my car watching my parents finally step off my porch, not defeated, just delayed, and my phone buzzed with a message from my lawyer. Emergency hearing set.
Today.
Bring everything. Bring everything. That line made my stomach flip because court isn't just a room, it's a stage, and my father lives for stages, and suddenly I realized the next battle wouldn't be on my porch or in my living room. It would be in a courtroom where my parents get to look like worried grandparents, and I have to look like the calm, credible mother who never breaks. And as I started the car to head there, another notification popped up that made my blood run cold again. A new email from the same law firm. Subject line Exhibit A, and the preview text read, "Attached is a recording that demonstrates the mother's instability," and I knew, with sick certainty, they had clipped something, twisted something, and were about to try to use my own night against me. The subject line, Exhibit A, made my stomach drop before I even opened it, because when someone weaponizes paperwork, they don't send it to communicate. They send it to control your breathing, and I sat in my car outside the courthouse with my lawyer's text still glowing on my screen. Emergency hearing set.
Today.
Bring everything. And I felt that familiar pressure in my chest, not just fear, but the sick awareness that my parents were trying to make a judge see me the way they've always wanted people to see me. Too emotional to trust, too reactive to believe, too unstable to be allowed to set boundaries. I opened the email and there it was, a file attachment labeled audio clip, and the preview line underneath said, "Demonstrates the mother's instability." And for one stupid second my brain tried to blame myself. Like maybe I did say something wrong last night. Maybe I sounded panicked. Maybe I cried too hard. Maybe my voice cracked. And then I snapped out of it because of course I sounded panicked. Armed men came into my home at 2 a.m. in front of my kids. Any human being with a pulse would sound panicked. And if the only way to be considered stable is to stay perfectly calm while your life is being invaded, then the definition is rigged. I forwarded the email to my lawyer and to the agent, and my lawyer replied almost instantly, "Don't listen alone." And then she called me, voice sharp and steady. "They're trying to bait you into spiraling," she said. "Save it. We'll play it in court with full context." Full context, those words were oxygen. I walked into the courthouse with a folder so thick it looked ridiculous. Photos of the broken door, the call sheet summary, screenshots of the threatening texts, the voicemail where my father said hard way, the school pickup request, the law firm emails, the CPS contact log, the doorbell camera clip of them performing on my porch, and my hands were shaking but my spine was straight because I wasn't walking in there to beg. I was walking in there to document. The hallway outside the courtroom felt like cold air and old carpet and that weird hush people put on when they're near judges. And then I saw them, my parents, sitting on a bench like they were waiting for a church service. My mother in a soft sweater with her tissue already in hand. My father in a pressed coat, calm face, polite posture, the exact same posture he used on my porch when the officers arrived. And he looked up at me and gave me the smallest smile, not warmth, control, like he was saying, "See, you always come back to my stage." My mother stood up immediately, and her voice turned into that trembling kindness that makes strangers feel sorry for her. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "we're so worried." And my father didn't speak yet. He let her do the emotional groundwork, because he knows men like him look better when they appear restrained. My lawyer stepped slightly in front of me, polite but firm. "No contact," she said, and my mother's face pinched like she'd been slapped. My father finally spoke, calm as a business meeting. "We're here for the children," he said, and it took everything in me not to laugh because people who are here for the children don't send tactical teams into children's bedrooms, and my lawyer replied, "Then you should have thought about the children before you made false reports." And my father's smile faded just a millimeter. We were called into the courtroom, and it was smaller than you expect from TV. No drama music, no gavel banging every 2 seconds. Just a judge with tired eyes and a clerk who's seen too much, and in that small room my parents tried to make themselves look like concerned grandparents caught in a tragic misunderstanding. My father spoke first, respectful tone. "Your Honor, we fear for our grandchildren's well-being," he said. "Our daughter has become unstable, erratic, and she refuses to cooperate with reasonable family support." Reasonable. There was that word again, the favorite word of people who want you to surrender. My mother dabbed her eyes and said, "We just want to help her." And then their attorney, slick voice, presented Exhibit A, the audio clip. The judge nodded, the clerk cued it, and my throat tightened because this was the moment they'd been building toward, the moment where a tiny piece of sound could be used to paint a whole person. The clip played, and I heard my own voice from last night, sharp and desperate, saying something like, "Don't go in there. My kids are asleep, please." And then a second clip of me saying, No, this is a lie." And then a tiny cut where my breathing sounded ragged, and then it stopped. Their attorney looked at the judge like, "See, unstable," and my father's expression stayed calm like he'd just presented a clean spreadsheet proving I'm a risk. My lawyer didn't flinch. She stood, asked permission, and then said the sentence that changed the room's temperature. "Your Honor," she said, "that audio is from a tactical entry into my client's home at 2 a.m. prompted by false emergency reports made by the petitioners. Presenting a mother's panic during an armed raid as proof of instability is not evidence of danger. It is evidence of trauma."
Trauma.
The judge's eyes narrowed slightly, not at me, at them. My lawyer then asked to play the full sequence with timestamps, and the judge allowed it, and that's when the trap flipped. The full context played, the part my parents didn't want the court to hear, the part where the lead agent on speaker asked direct questions, and my parents' language slipped from concern into intent. The judge heard my father's hard-way voicemail. The judge heard my mother admit, "We said what we needed to say to get someone to take it seriously." The judge heard my father say, "Did you search the kids' rooms?" And the judge saw the doorbell footage of them bringing a third party to my porch, knocking repeatedly, speaking loudly for neighbors, performing for the camera. Then my lawyer submitted the school pickup request printout with my father's note calling me unstable, and the principal's security lock confirmation, and the CPS worker's note that the home was safe and the children were fine, and the report appeared retaliatory. My father's attorney tried to object, tried to redirect, tried to make it about family, and the judge held up a hand and said, "Enough," and I swear that single word was the first time in my life my father's authority didn't fill a room. The judge looked directly at my parents and asked, "Did either of you make the emergency report that resulted in armed entry?" My father started to talk in circles. We were concerned, and the judge cut him off. "Yes or no?" My mother's mouth trembled. My father finally said, "We contacted authorities," and the judge asked, "Did you knowingly exaggerate or fabricate information to trigger a heightened response?" My mother whispered, "We just wanted someone to take it seriously," and the judge said, "That is not an answer." And then my lawyer handed up the call log confirmation and the recording reference number, and the judge's face changed from neutral to stern. My father tried one last time. "Your Honor, my daughter is manipulating the system against us." And the judge looked at him and said, "Sir, you manipulated the system the moment you made an emergency report with children in the home and then attempted to leverage that incident for custody access." Leverage. Hearing that word out loud from a judge felt like the universe finally naming the monster. The judge granted the emergency protective order: no contact, no third-party contact, no approaching the home, no approaching the school, no attempting pickup, no attempting access through welfare reports without consequence, and he ordered that any future contact attempts be documented as violations. He also ordered that the door damage and related costs be preserved for restitution review, and when he said restitution, my father's jaw tightened because money is the only language he respects, and suddenly it was speaking back. My mother started crying real tears then, not performance tears, because consequences feel different when they're signed. My father stayed stiff and quiet, but his eyes were burning. After the hearing, as we stepped into the hallway, my father leaned close enough that his cologne hit me and he said low, "You think you won?" And my whole body tensed, and my lawyer immediately stepped between us and said, "Do not speak to her. and a bailiff looked over, and my father backed away like he was being inconvenienced. I walked out into daylight feeling lighter and sicker at the same time. Lighter because my kids were protected by something stronger than my pleading, and sicker because the people who should have been my safety net were the ones who tried to turn my children into a bargaining chip. And here's the moral lesson nobody likes to say out loud, but it's the only one that matters. Some people don't want peace. They want access. And when you give them access, they don't become grateful. They become bolder. Boundaries without consequences are just requests, and a manipulator will always treat your requests like jokes. So I want you to answer this straight in the comments because I know this is going to split people right down the middle. If your parents sent armed men to your home at 2 a.m. and then tried to use schools, CPS, and court paperwork to get your kids, would you ever speak to them again? Or would you treat them like any other threat to your family's safety? And if you're sitting there thinking, but they're family, I want you to sit with this question too. If family loyalty requires you to stay silent while someone endangers your children, is that loyalty or is that self-betrayal? I went home that night, checked the locks, held my kids a little longer, and for the first time since this started, I slept more than an hour without waking up to phantom footsteps. But I'm not going to lie to you and wrap this in a neat bow because life doesn't do neat bows. My father didn't look defeated, he looked delayed, and delayed people come back with new tactics. The next morning my lawyer called and said one more thing, and my stomach dropped again, because there is always one more thing with people like my parents. She said, "Your father's attorney filed a request for records and a separate complaint alleging you coached the children," and I closed my eyes because of course he did. Of course he couldn't accept losing without trying to poison the water again. So, if you think this ends at a protective order, you haven't met people who treat control like oxygen. If you want the next video to make sense, you need to watch what happens when my father realizes courts don't respond to charm anymore, and he tries a different weapon entirely, the kind that doesn't need a doorbell camera, doesn't need neighbors, and doesn't even need my consent, because the next move he made was the first time I thought, for real, that he might try to destroy my life from the inside out.